Hi everyone, in this recording we're going to learn about how we can construct an assessment that assesses higher order thinking. And much of this process is going to look very similar to what we've learned in previous weeks about constructing an assessment in general. So the assessment that we're going to look at for the purposes of modeling this, we have a fourth grade teacher, and this teacher wants to assess her students on a few different learning standards that pertain to story elements. Specifically, the teacher wants students to be able to know what the theme of a story is, be able to describe story elements like character and setting, and this teacher also wants students to be able to demonstrate that they can take details and information from a text and interpret that information. So for this assessment, the teacher is going to assess these story elements, assess these standards, using the book Big Wolf and Little Wolf, which looks like this. And I'm not going to read this book aloud to you because I don't think that a knowledge of the book is necessary for you to understand how I constructed the assessment about this book. However, if this book interests you, and it should because it's very cute, you can look for a read aloud on YouTube. I know there are several if you are interested in learning more about it. So the process for constructing an assessment that assesses higher order thinking is very similar to how we construct a typical assessment, as we've studied previously. So here I have my table of specifications. So I took the learning standards that this teacher has been teaching to her students, and I plugged them in here. And then I looked at the different skills that students would need to master in order to demonstrate that they do understand the standard. I also thought about the content knowledge that students would need to demonstrate to show mastery of the standard. And I broke down those standards according to content knowledge and skills, and I crafted these learning targets or learning objectives, whatever you want to call them. I'm just calling them targets here, but we're talking about the same thing. So here are my learning targets over here on the right column. So then what I did, I copied and pasted my learning targets here, and then I put them into my blueprint. So each of these learning targets matches what we have here in this assessment blueprint. So my blueprint looks similar to blueprints that we've looked at before in previous weeks when we talked about how to construct an assessment. So I have my learning targets all the way over to the left. I also have the point value associated with each learning target. For example, this first learning target here is worth a total of 15 points. And I also have my item numbers or question numbers shown here. So we can see that questions 2, 5, and 9 are all linked to this learning target here. Students will be able to refer to details in a story to answer questions about characters, settings, and events. So what's slightly different about this blueprint compared to other blueprints that we've looked at is that I've added the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy to this blueprint. So what this blueprint with the levels of Bloom's taxonomy enables me to do is to think about which questions I want to correspond to different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and that allows me to see as the teacher and as the creator of this assessment that I'm distributing questions across the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Because it's important for students to know lower order thinking, right? They need to be able to remember information. They need to be able to understand information. Like those skills should not be devalued in any way. But we also want students to be able to demonstrate that they can think at higher levels, like being able to analyze information or evaluate information. So by constructing an assessment blueprint in this way, we can see how we're distributing our questions across the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So if I look across the columns here, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, I can see that I have one question at the remember level, which is appropriate because we do want students to be able to remember information from a book, but it's not as important as, say, being able to analyze information from a book, right? And if we keep looking across the columns, you can see I have 3 questions under understand, 1 question under apply, 3 under analyze, and so forth. So I can see how I've distributed the questions across different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm not placing too much emphasis within this assessment on just one level of thinking. It's pretty even across the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So I have questions of all different levels here in this assessment. So when you are crafting your assessment and you're creating your blueprint, you want to think about, okay, here's my question number, what level of Bloom's taxonomy do I want it to be at? and then you actually write the question. So you create your blueprint first, and you determine, which question is going to be at which level first, and then you craft your questions last, right? I know that sometimes it seems counterintuitive. Sometimes people want to craft their questions and then make the blueprint, but that's not how we do it. We create our blueprint first, so we have a clear plan for how our assessment is going to look, and then we actually write like the test questions, or whatever it is we're assessing, or our essay questions, whatever it may be. So that's how we create our assessment blueprint here. So one thing I want to point out is that one of the learning targets is that students will be able to construct a story with a given theme. So that's actually at the create level of Bloom's taxonomy. So I've placed it here under the create column, which makes a lot of sense. One thing to point out is that these other questions on the test that I've created are all selected response questions, where students simply have to recognize what the correct answer is. They do have to, do some analysis and evaluation to arrive at the correct answer, but they don't have to write out the correct answer. They're just simply choosing it. But at the create level of Bloom's taxonomy, it doesn't really work. Like, you can't create something with a multiple choice question, right? You can't achieve that level of thinking by choosing an answer on a multiple choice test. So in order to make sure that my students are thinking at this create level of Bloom's taxonomy, I developed a constructed response item for them to demonstrate that they can think at that level. So their create level tasks for this assessment is for them to construct an epilogue, which is a series of events that happen after the story occurs. So, all right, here's Big Wolf and Little Wolf. Here's the end of the story. What happens next in your imagination to Big Wolf and Little Wolf? So students are constructing an epilogue, and they have to adhere to the original theme of the story, which also demonstrates that they understand what the theme of the story was as they're constructing their epilogues. So I just wanted to point that out. So you cannot use a multiple choice question to assess students' ability to create. So in a nutshell, just to recap how we created this, we created a typical assessment blueprint, but we added different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and we determined which questions we wanted to place at which level of Bloom's taxonomy to ensure that we were including each of the different levels, and that we weren't including too much at one level and too little at another level. So this is our assessment, and by doing the blueprint in this way, we are able to ensure that our students are thinking at a variety of different levels as they are doing this assessment.